Okay, members, we'll call the meeting to order now. Thanks very much for attending. Now, we're at the Grange Council offices in Omagh, and we also are joined by officials and councillors online. There's a good attendance here online, and those councillors who are in attendance will have their cameras switched on. Not sure if I can mandate everybody else to do that, but I can in the case of the councillors. So thanks for having your cameras on for the duration of this meeting. Thank you. And we all know what this meeting is. This meeting, if I can just have the agenda here, Dev. Right. This meeting is our annual special meeting with the housing executive, with the team. And before we go to the presentation, which is the substantive issue in the meeting, item 3, we'll go to apologies first. So I'll go to the parties in a particular order. So I'll ask maybe Thomas O'Reilly if, sorry, Debbie is online. That's good. I'm glad Debbie's online. That'll help me. I'll go to you, Debbie, first for apologies from the Sinn Féin party.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Councillor Stevie McCann, although he may come in online a bit later, Councillor Podrigan Kelly, Councillor Catherine Kelly and Councillor Patrick Withers.
Okay, thank you. Is Victor online? If not, okay, sorry. Rosemary, sorry, Rosemary's in the chamber. I've got me straight now. Thank you, Rosemary Barton.
Yeah. Apologies from Victor Warrington, Alan Rainey and Robert Irvine.
Okay, thank you. And then from the Democratic Unionist Party, DUP, is there an apology to be forwarded?
Councillor Mochan, Councillor Buchanan, Councillor Hawks.
Thank you. All. I'll go now to Councillor Bernard McGrath.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Gannon.
Right, from the SDLP grouping. And Councillor Deehan's online. Is Garvin online? I'm just going to check. No. Okay. So that's the apologies dealt with. Okay. No one from the Alliance on. Okay. So we'll move into item 2 then, which is declarations of interest. We'll check the chamber and I'll check online. And there may not be declarations of interest, it appears. So with that, we'll move on. So we're going to receive a presentation now from the Housing Executive on the investment plan for this council area. So members will have a copy attached, and this report was embargoed until the commencement of tonight's meeting, which is understandable. Okay. And well, I'll hand over to yourself, Grania, to introduce your team and make your presentation. Over to you, Grania.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members, and thank you as ever for the opportunity to present tonight and for affording us the opportunity of a full council. We really appreciate it. Myself, Grania Long, Chief Executive of the Housing Executive, and Helen Hicks, my colleagues who you will all know, is here, and obviously Sinead Collins from our placemaking team, and John McCartan, also who Assistant Director. I have a number of colleagues on screen as well, so very, very happy to take questions, obviously, and may call on a number of colleagues as we go through. So if I just start by thanking you all as members, both elected members and officers of the council. We are community planning partners. We work very, very well together, and obviously we have, from a housing executive point of view, housing, community investment, community benefit at the heart of everything that we do. But I have to say, we really, really appreciate the partnership that we have with council, with a very strong focus on housing supply, on getting homes, social and affordable housing built. But obviously there's a range of other areas, including the improvement of our own stock as a landlord, as well as that focus on ensuring community planning in the widest sense, so the economic and the social and environmental benefit of the work that we can do. I know obviously housing is an area of real focus. There's obviously a conference on later this week on Friday, which council has been spearheading, and again really, really pleased to see the level of interest, and again very grateful to everyone for their support. So if I just start with the numbers, and so we have in the district 45,714 households, and you'll see the split there on your screen and in the report. 69% owner occupied, and then 22% private rented and 9% social rented. And the housing executive itself as a landlord manages 3,500 social homes and keeps us busy obviously on the ground. And I'll talk you through some of the work that we've been doing in the last year. So last year, 24-25 financial year, the housing executive invested 46 million across the district, and that's obviously really important area of focus for us, whether it's on new build, and I'll come on to in more detail as I go through the presentation what that means in terms of numbers, in terms of output, but certainly very, very healthy programme, both in terms of what we're investing in our own stocks. You'll see our planned maintenance programme there of 3.4 million, our response maintenance programme, and then obviously then the other pieces of work or the other investment that we make in our own homes. Alongside that, a healthy new build programme of 6.3 million. And I'm really pleased to say that, you know, obviously we have a number of really, really important partners locally in the voluntary community sector, Women's Aid and others. And obviously our work, the investment that we make in supporting people is a really important funding stream, because that allows us to invest in housing support for people with disabilities, for older people, people who are homeless, etc. And so that Supporting People programme is very, very important. And I know we've got some really important partners locally. I know there's a specific focus, for example, on young people and sustaining tenancies and shared tenancies locally. So again, I think this is a council where we've seen real partnership and we're delighted to see that. Housing benefit obviously plays a very important role. Housing benefit, you know, makes a huge contribution to the meeting of housing need locally. So you'll see there just over 24 million pounds in housing benefit investment, and there's a range of other areas. I'm happy to take questions on any of that, obviously, as we go through this. Understandably, and with you, our focus is on new build, very heavy focus and strong focus on new build. And as I said, 6.3 million last year invested in new social housing and 42 completions, but importantly, 136 under construction at the end of March. And of course, the reason for that is the waiting list, and you see the trends going upwards. And in the years I've been presenting to you, again, the numbers continue. We continue to see both the scale and the nature of housing need increase. And we can go through some of those numbers and what it means in detail. But while the overall total number of applicants continues to go up, very importantly, it's those households in housing stress. So those people who are living in housing that is unsuitable for them for a range of reasons. And we see those numbers going up. And that's the area that we are really, really focused on, myself and the team locally. We obviously, as part of the range of duties that we have as an organisation, one of our key duties is that 15-year housing market assessment. So that's where we look forward and we project the number of homes that we need to build over the next 15 years. We also have a 5-year assessment looking just at social housing, but this one gives a cross tenure view. And so you'll see there for Fermanagh and Omagh district, you will see that over the next 15 years, 5,350 homes are required, and we've split that between open market for sale housing, 920 social homes and 860 intermediate, and you can see how that compares then with the Northern Ireland total. So again, those numbers we watch and we monitor every year. We use those numbers, of course, to feed into councils for the development of their local development plans. And obviously we're a statutory consultee in relation to planning applications. So that data is live and it's dynamic, and we update it every year, and it's a very important piece of work that we undertake.
Grania, just the definition of intermediate there.
Yeah, so intermediate essentially is anything that is not open market for sale and not social housing. So it tends to be either a product like shared ownership or co-ownership, where the household will either purchase part of the property. So you're the owner of the entire property, but you purchase a portion of the property and then you buy out equity over time. Okay, so you might buy 40% or 50% of the equity in the property, and then as you go through and you rent the rest, and as you go through the years, then you might continue to buy out in its entirety. You might never do that, so you may only ever own or pay the mortgage part. So that's one product. The other product then obviously is what we call affordable rent. So that would be a rent that's not that's less than private rented sector rents. So it's below market rent. And so there's a number of products. Now, Northern Ireland has not had sufficient intermediate products really. And so this is an area that we are ourselves in the department very focused on in terms of how do we grow the number of intermediate products? Because of course, if we have more affordable housing or intermediate products, that takes the pressure off the social housing waiting list. It will be of benefit to households that are not the lowest income households. They might be households maybe with 2 people working in the house and that are able to afford something that that meets their needs, where they're not able necessarily to afford to purchase a home or they're not necessarily able to afford private rented sector accommodation, but wouldn't necessarily qualify for social housing. So it's that in between in terms of affordability. And they, again, really, really important products and really important offers that we have them. So we would want to see those coming forward in the next number of years. In terms of affordable housing supply then, you'll see there every year we set targets both on an annual period and over a number of years. So again, for the 2025 to 28, you'll see that we have 285 new social housing units programmed. We also set a 5-year target. As we always say, what gets measured gets done. So targets are hugely important. And the target that we set for that previous 5-year period was 182 starts. And I'm very pleased to say that we have exceeded, and when I say we, I mean the Housing Executive with housing associations and with you as a council, as planning teams. We have exceeded that target with 217 starts, and the balance there is 194 urban and 23 rural. But you'll also see that what we haven't done is met our rural target. So again, that's something that we are really, really focused on. And there's a number of reasons for that. Availability of land, crucially, is a challenge and a constraint, and obviously then ensuring that housing associations themselves are prepared to step forward in relation to and have the capacity and I suppose the presence locally in terms of being able to take those sites forward. So there's a range of challenges there. We work very, very effectively with housing associations and work very well with them. And I know associations, and many of them very, very committed to rural housing. So it's a target that we will absolutely keep. It's a target that we're very committed to. And certainly we're looking at the range of ways in which we can improve rural housing output, and whether that's through identifying sites, so site identification studies, or undertaking rural needs tests. We will do everything that we possibly can to take that forward. In terms of the projected spend then for 25-26, now what we don't include in this, in case you're worried that this is a dramatic reduction in investment, it's not. We haven't included the housing benefit figures because we won't know what we've spent until the end of the year, and we haven't included the new build figures because, again, until we've spent out the programme. So you'll see the total numbers in this next year. But what is really good to see is a continued increased spend or continued spend and high levels of spend, both on the housing executive landlord, both on the our plan schemes, our adaptations as well. And really, really good to see that, because, you know, as a landlord, our stock is getting older. We have stock that is very much in need of improvement. And so we've been very, very committed and focused on getting spend up, eating into any backlogs that we have locally, and ensuring that that we're investing in our homes. And I know there's a number of good news stories to tell in terms of either our grounds maintenance work locally, and there's been lots of activity in terms of our grounds maintenance in the last year or so. And I'm again happy to take any questions on that. If we just talk, I have 2 more slides, Chair, if you're content. If we just talk about the challenges. I mean, again, every council I've been briefing, and we've been speaking at length about homelessness and levels of homelessness, and it's been very, very important to us as the Strategic Housing Authority that we have a steady supply of temporary accommodation provision. Unlike in other jurisdictions, we're keeping the numbers in hotels and bed and breakfast accommodation as low as possible. I think Helen's advised me that there was just 1 placement in a hotel recently. Our focus locally has been on higher quality temporary accommodation. We obviously don't want to be placing anyone in temporary accommodation, can I say, and ultimately we want to get to the point where there's very little need or no need for temporary accommodation. But when we have periods, as we have done since the pandemic, where we need temporary accommodation, our focus will always be on keeping that as high quality as possible. So we've increased the number of single lets locally, to ensure that that we are able to place people in single lets and flats, rather than obviously hotels and bed and breakfast. And of course, we've kept the placement of children, families with children, as low as possible across the piece. So we have again 200 units of temporary accommodation locally, and the majority of those are single lets, and that's been a really significant area of focus for us and for the team. In terms of opportunities, obviously now we have the housing supply strategy has been agreed by the Northern Ireland Executive. So that again is really something that we're very pleased about. We now have very specific targets for social and affordable housing. We hope that that will lead to the budget that we need, the capital budget that we will want to spend across all 11 council areas. And I know obviously your level of ambition, council, in relation to new build, and a really good spread of new build, both rural and urban, and between Omagh, Enniskillen and all of the towns and rural areas. So again, we're very focused on that and very focused on ensuring that you have both the data that you need from us, the support where we can for a programme of new build. And we certainly will do that. We'll continue to work very closely with you. And I suppose the final point I would make is we are also in a position whereby we've been given approval, the Housing Executive, to acquire properties. So we want to be acquiring about 600 properties over the next number of years now for use initially as temporary accommodation, but fundamentally we will want to use them for general needs once we move beyond the current very high level of demand for temporary accommodation. And I'll probably leave it there, Chair, and for as many questions as we have time. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Grania, good overview. And just in relation to the upcoming housing conference, and thanks to your own people who will be in attendance, including Sinead, who will be speaking at the conference. Looking forward to that. But I suppose one of my questions is, it's very basic, where are our young people to live? Anybody in their 20s that I meet right now, say above 22, 23, they're nearly all anxious about their housing future. Today I met with Sinead McAvoy and with Alan from the council, pre-meeting ahead of the conference, and we met in the doorway, a girl aged 25, and this was her very concern. She said, "Where am I going to live?" She said, "I have no hope. I have nothing on the horizon. I really don't know where I'm going to live." So one of the motivators for having this conference is obviously a council motion that was passed, but it's that general sentiment, where are our young people, where are our people going to live in the future, So that's what the housing conference is about on Friday, and about all ancillary matters, rural and urban within this council area. So even just a simple answer to that question, Grania, where are our young people to live?
Thank you. Well, I suppose fundamentally that's why we undertake that housing market assessment. The market assessment essentially tells us what the scale of the housing need is locally, the nature of that housing need. So in other words, it doesn't just tell us the numbers, it also tells us the types of households. So it will tell us, for example, the projected number of single person households and family households and so on. And it will also tell us, on the basis of affordability, what that balance needs to be now between social housing, so whether that's housing executive or housing association homes, intermediate housing, and a market sale. And again, that's why I think it's so important now over the next number of years that we really have a very strong focus on intermediate housing, that we do have offers available for all age groups, of course, but particularly for we tend to use the term in housing key worker housing. So that's housing that is for people who are who need to be in a certain location to access work and to be able to access the labour market, and who by virtue of having a wage of a certain level would qualify them then for, as I say, either intermediate rent, so to 80% market rent, or indeed to be able to purchase or get on the property ladder and start to purchase a portion of the total sale of a property. And so those offers are available elsewhere. If you were in Scotland, if you were in Wales, in England, you would have a greater choice if you were a young person. And so I suppose that's what we're trying to do now, working with yourselves, with the planning colleagues, to ensure that we have the right balance between social housing, intermediate housing, because, as I say, open market sale is not for everyone, it would be for some. But you can see in the numbers just even the split between owner-occupied housing that I said at the start of the presentation. There's always a need for other offers for people, particularly for young people.
So in your presentation, you talked about particular focus on increasing the intermediate product offering availability in the future. Okay, so I'm going to go to councillors variously now. I think what I'll do is I'll go to a councillor in the chamber first, then online. I have 3 expressions online and I have 3 or 4 in the chamber here. So we'll go to Thomas O'Reilly first, seconded then, a second person in will be Glenn Campbell. So Councillor O'Reilly in the chamber.
Thank you, Chair, and you're very welcome, Grania team. Helen, as always, very welcome here and have regular contact on various fronts from Helen. I note that you didn't meet the rural target there, which I'm going to speak about from a rural perspective of small villages. And I think that it is very, very important to put it into the context of the survivability of rural villages. And we see continuously the numbers of housing built in the big urban centres and not in the small villages. And you can sort of quote the unavailability or the difficulty in accessing land. That doesn't wash with me as a rationale. If that, there needs to be something else done to try to procure. And certainly from the experience that we have in Fermanagh, there are many, many rural villages with lots of sites sitting there from the boom time that has never been developed and are they are waiting to be, and some of them half finished. So I suppose that's sort of given a little bit of context, and I come to my point. My point being that a number of years ago, we had latent demand testing that arrived in Newton Butler and was successful to deliver 6 units. And that was after many years of latent demand testing not achieving any units to be built. And we then push forward a number of years later, and we still have no units built. So those people that went through that difficult process were encouraged to get there, and now we have nothing. So we have, at this point in time, in one context at least, one housing association who took on the job of building those 6 units and as yet haven't achieved one iota of a movement forward. Is there something that the housing executive can do to change the time frame in which we're looking at all of this? When you take the whole length of time from the latent demand testing to you turn the key, walking through the door, those people have grown up, moved away and had families, and we still have no units built. So I suppose there is something fundamentally wrong in the system there, and I'm wondering, can you be part of the solution, Grania, to find a way forward? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. And I suppose for me, the demonstration that we are serious about this is the fact that we have targets, rural targets. I mean, in other jurisdictions, they just have one target and they don't distinguish between urban and rural. I think it's really, really important that we have it, that we continue to hold ourselves to those targets. And I say ourselves, I mean, all of us, you know, Housing Authority, Planning Authority, Housing Association. So we won't walk away from those targets just because they might be difficult. And that's very important that I say that. I think the second thing is, unfortunately, the housing executive, as you know, does not itself build. So what we are doing is commissioning, well, first of all, undertaking those needs assessments. And I agree entirely. It's important that we do them. We must understand the nature of housing need locally. But what happens beyond that is we then present that need in our annual document, which we make available to anybody, to developers, to housing associations, and housing associations themselves must then make the decision as to what they want to take forward locally, whether they want to purchase or acquire that land, or indeed enter into development partnerships. So yes, we're not in control of the step beyond that, other than not in direct control of the step beyond that. And we must then await delivery partners to come forward. And that can take time. And there's, I'm sure, lots of reasons for that. But the frustration, obviously, for people on the waiting list is, why is this not happening more quickly? In terms of what we do in terms of the housing executive, we will obviously, where we can, we have transferred our own land to housing associations to develop. So we've done that many times and proactively, and again, content to do that, and will continue to do that. However, I think there's much more. And in fact, there is much more that I would like the housing executive to be able to do in terms of intervening in public land more generally. So we transfer our land. We can't transfer anybody else's land. It's not ours to do that. But I certainly would like to be in a position whereby the housing executive could assemble public land and do that, so that we can transfer that to housing associations and speed up that process. And I know many housing associations, or some housing associations certainly themselves, frustrated at the lack of sites. And that's a general comment rather than specific to this council area. So I think better use of public land, a bit more kind of proactive intervention, maybe enhancing our own powers to enable us to do that, would make a difference. And we'd like then, if we had those powers, to be able to do that in partnership with, for example, council, and actually take a much more of a place shaping or place making approach to that. So it's, I would say this, I would prefer it to be housing led development. There will be others who might have a wider regeneration focus. But either way, I think, not just assuming that, that land is there to be purchased, but actually taking quite an intervention strategic approach to land use. Sinead, I'm not sure if there's anything you want to add to that, either in terms of specifics locally. Thank you.
Yeah, just to state that the latent demand test, or the real needs test that we undertake, is only in areas where...
Speak into the mic,
Oh,
Sinead.
sorry.
Thank
It's
you.
only in areas where we haven't identified need. The need isn't evident through the waiting list. But increasingly, the annual housing need assessment is indicating to us that there is an increase in rural need right across the district. In fact, rural need has increased from 45 units in 2019 to 331 in 2024. So that's really a marked increase. In 2019, 23 of the 35 rural housing need assessment areas had no projected need whatsoever, and that's down to 3 this year. So I mean, there is definitely evidence that there's need there, and we're not so much relying on the rural needs testing process. Over the past 5 years, we've had 23 rural starts. We had a scheme in Dromore which completed last year, and another scheme in Greyhill Meadows and Clabby, which is on site, which went on site last year. But over the next 3 years, we've 46 units included on the programme. So we've already doubled the provision and their performance there. But with increasing need, and with events such as the conference on Friday and through our commissioning guide, we can relay to housing associations the increase in need and the focus that needs to be there in identifying sites in rural settlements right across this district.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Just before I come to Councillor Campbell, I want to pick up on a phrase that you used, Grania. This is a wee bit challenging, perhaps. So, unfortunately, the housing executive does not build. Now, that conflicts with my understanding that the Department for Communities has given the power, borrowing powers, the green light to the housing executive to start building houses again. Now, it's my understanding that there's 6 being built or completed in North Belfast. Now, if I was to put on my hat as an Omagh town councillor in a changing situation where 5 school sites are coming onto the market, I would want to hear from the housing executive that you have your eye on at least one of them sites, and that you have a plan to build social houses for the first time in over 30 years. So I have to say that as robustly as I can, and that I expect, and the people expect, you to take up on those powers that have been given to you by the Department for Communities to start building again, and to build a development, a new housing estate For example, in Oma, there are other towns as well, Enniskillen and villages and smaller towns and other rural developments, you know. Sometimes they're called hamlets, sometimes they're called dispersed rural communities. But we do reasonably expect the housing executive to build houses in our council area as soon as possible. And in the context of Oma Town, take a look at available sites and soon to be available sites and plan at least one development to make a difference in our community. So that's my point to you, Grania. Can you respond, please?
Thank you. Yes. So I think we share a robust ambition for new build social housing. And I would love to be in a position and indeed look forward to the time when the housing executive is able to build in this council area. It's not the case yet that we have had our powers changed. So it is departmental policy. So the previous minister, Minister Hargey, announced in 2020 that she would, it was her view that the housing executive should be freed up in order to borrow, in order to build new homes. Existing current minister, Minister Lyons, has also taken that forward and has been making that point. He has specifically, Northern Ireland Executive has now prioritised that in the programme for government, which we're very pleased to see. And a specific ask has been made of Treasury. So it would be a decision by UK Treasury to change budgeting guidance to enable us to borrow. So while it is policy that we should do so, it has not been agreed yet by Treasury. And so we do not currently have those powers. We have been looking at in the interim what we could do to take forward to build our capacity. So our previous corporate strategy as an organisation, being well aware that the housing executive would, fingers crossed, be able to add to new supply and build again in the near future. We began to look at how we build our own organisational capacity back up. We haven't built for 25, 26 years. So a key part of that was to take forward a pilot of 6 homes in North Belfast. And that was completed last year, delighted to say. But it was a one-off pilot. We had agreement from the department to do it once. And that's the only that was the basis on which we would do that. And also it was taken forward on a housing executive site, which reduced the cost, obviously, and enabled us to test the development of passive house standards. So in other words, ultra low carbon housing. So delighted that we were able to do that. It was a one-off. We were not able to do it beyond that council area, but certainly it very much, and just to give everybody in this council and online reassurance, it is very, very strongly our ambition that we look forward to building again, and we would want to do it in all 11 council areas.
Okay, thank you. I'll go now to Councillor Glenn Campbell.
Garmilga Caherly, and thanks to Housing Executive representatives for their update. I suppose recently, and it's something I wanted to ask, you mentioned the amount of emergency accommodation which you had, if you like, in stock. In the case of a person presenting as homeless, I mean, I know homelessness is a hidden issue, so there are many who are homeless, but we don't see them because they're on people's they're sharing accommodation maybe or sleeping on sofas, etc. But in terms of someone who presents homeless in like a crisis situation, and I've came across this recently in the last 2 weeks, what intervention can the housing executive do there? I know that every circumstance is different, and there's a possibility that person has a home somewhere, but does the housing executive have a role there? And how would the housing executive predict when that problem might get worse? You know, because I know that we're fortunate, I think, where this isn't something that we see presented on our streets in Oma as much as maybe in a city, for example, Belfast. But it is something that I've seen within the past fortnight, and having contacted the PSNI to try and get some advice and support and to check on the well-being of the person, it wasn't a surprise, and it was maybe something they expect to see more of. But how would the housing executive plan for an increase? And we don't want an increase, but how would they plan for that? And how is there any way that they can intervene? And what's the process around that type of emergency housing need?
Okay, thanks, Councillor.
Thank you. Yes, so this is an area that we've seen obviously considerable demand, and you're absolutely right to say that we've seen an increase in homelessness in areas maybe that we hadn't seen homelessness for many years. And so it's, while the majority of the households and people who are presenting to the housing executive tend to do so in the cities, and in particular in Belfast, Derry, London, Derry, we have absolutely seen a growth in homelessness presentations across all council areas. So I suppose the first thing I would say to you is we have, if somebody presents to us, then there are a number of tests that we will apply in terms of that individual circumstances. And I'm sure you're only too aware in terms of getting in touch with either with the local office or our central team in relation to if you want to refer somebody on. What we have done then is in terms of making sure that we have the right level of emergency, of temporary accommodation, because we have a duty, an unending duty to households who are homeless, to provide them with temporary accommodation should they need it. And so we have been working very hard over the last 2 to 3 years to increase our supply of single lets and other forms of temporary accommodation in every council area. As I say, I think we're up to about 200 in this council, which I have to say, I don't think I ever would imagine that from Annanoma District Council that we would need 200 units of temporary accommodation. So that will tell you just how quickly we've had to get ahead since the pandemic in having single lets at scale. So we will always look at the numbers and we will always be projecting forward what we think we will need. We haven't failed in our statutory duty to anyone who's been homeless. So again, we have made accommodation available. Very grateful to the department who have continued to ensure that we have the funding. We've been managing that very carefully in terms of ensuring value for public money, reducing down the numbers of hotel units that we need because they're incredibly expensive, as you can imagine. So I suppose that's ultimately our approach, is to be looking forward to understand where we think the need would be, and to make sure that we have a ready and a steady supply. It's not always the case that we will always be able to get it right. So in other words, sometimes we will have to place somebody in temporary accommodation outside of the council area. Where we have to do that, it's for as minimal a period as we can enable it to be, so somebody can move back and be closer to home or family or networks and so and work, of course. So it is a movable feast. We are certainly seeing very positive progress in terms of reducing down the numbers in hotels, reducing the cost of hotels, and reducing the cost of temporary accommodation overall. But this is a busy time of year, October, November into the winter, and so we'll watch it very, very closely.
Okay, thank you. Go now to Councillor McGrath, Bernard McGrath.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Grania and Helen and the team for coming here tonight. I suppose Fermanagh and Omagh District is one of the biggest areas in the north, and we've been speaking to Minister of Finance and Minister of Infrastructure over this past few months, and the big picture coming across is like our reality seems to put us at a disadvantage regarding water, sewage, infrastructure, things like that. Is there a breakdown of spend per council area, even DEA? I'm thinking of my own area of Metro. Do you break it down? And then, just to make sure that, that we're getting our fair share of resources. And the second question is, in 24-25, the housing benefit spend was 464, and 25-26 it was 307. That's 157 million of a difference. Where is that money coming from, and who takes that, or where is that coming from, tenants or what? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So on the first question, yes. So our housing investment plan that's before you this evening gives you the breakdown across all the council areas of our investment, both in terms of new build social housing, but also what we invest in our stock. So you'll be able to see that it's in the document. I suppose what I should say, obviously, is that we commission the new build programme on the basis of housing needs. So it will be needs based rather than geographically based. However, our strategic guidelines, and sorry for the terms, we also in setting the programme, we make sure there is a good spread across the 11 councils. And that's those targets that I was talking about earlier on. So again, we can, they're available to you. Yes, the housing benefit numbers, have changed in the last number of years. So you'll be aware that households are now moving from housing benefit to universal credit. So the numbers where you see housing benefit numbers going down, it's due to that now, that transition to universal credit. So it's not that households are not getting those benefits, they're getting it in a different form, and it's now called universal credit. I apologise, that's a decision that was made by Westminster, so it's about essentially how we categorise it, but it looks like the numbers are going down, but essentially it's that transition to universal credit.
Okay, thank you. I'll go now to Councillor Deehan and then Councillor Green will be after that. Councillor Deehan.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to Gráinne and her team. Thank you so much for giving us your time this evening to present your report and answer our questions. And thank you for all the work that you and your team have done to deliver improved housing in our council area over the past year and more. My question, Chair, is around intermediate housing provision. And Chair, I think Gráinne referenced in her report the lowest uptake of co-ownership scheme is in Fermanagh and Omagh District Council area. And this surprises me, Chair. And I'm just wondering why is that? Because I know that the co-ownership scheme has been in existence for many decades and many households have benefited greatly from that. So is it a question of those opportunities are not presenting themselves, or people and households in housing need are not able to afford co-ownership schemes, or is it that these opportunities are not being promoted as well as they might? So I just wondered if Gráinne or a team member could answer some of these queries, because it seems to me that it would be a great opportunity for families to get a foothold on the housing ladder and so have their housing needs addressed at the same time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Deehan.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, so look, if I give you, I suppose, my own view of why this might be, but I would want to kind of caveat this with co-ownership obviously would have the detail on this. It's a model that we very, very strongly support. I think shared ownership, co-ownership is a really, really important access point to the housing market for households that can afford it. So co-ownership is a hugely important partner of ours, and we're very, very pleased that it exists in Northern Ireland, and as you've said, has been around a long time and has provided opportunities to many thousands of people. So look, it is obviously it's a model or an offer that is down to individual households making that choice. So if you're someone who is seeking to buy a home, I suppose you'd need to know the co-ownership is available to you. So it may be down to, it may just be down to some households not knowing that it's available. It may also be down to eligibility. So if those households are eligible, or it may be down to what's available in the market. So in general terms, I would say it's probably a combination of all of those things, but more specifically, I think maybe this may be something you'd like to, and I hope it doesn't sound like I'm passing the buck, but this may be something you'd like to speak to co-ownership specifically themselves. They will have much more detail than we would on I suppose, level of interest from people within this council area. But certainly, I know co-ownership very, very committed to ensuring that there is a strong spread across all council areas. So it may be a combination of those things, maybe a lack of knowledge of the product, or a little bit of lack of knowledge of the product. And also, because it is about individuals, households choosing to purchase, then you're very much, I suppose, influenced by what's happening in the local market.
Okay,
Well, thanks for that clarification, and certainly it's something that we would want to explore in more detail. Thank you, Chair.
and just on that, Councillor Deehan, I'm going to bring in Sinead, our Director, in a second or two, but in finalising the programme for the Housing Conference on Friday, we've made absolutely sure that co-ownership will be present, because it is about getting the message out about the nature of their offering. I think there is a lack of awareness about co-ownership options. There'll be pluses and minuses in it, but there's not enough knowledge about the nature of the offering. I'll just ask Sinead McAvoy to maybe contribute to this conversation now. Sinead?
Thank you, Chair. And as you say, co-ownership will be one of our speakers at the conference, a housing conference on Friday. The points that you've made, Councillor Deehan and Chair, I suppose are things that we've asked co-ownership to address in their presentation, particularly around if the uptake is so low in Fermanagh, which it does seem to be, then why might that be? Members will also be aware that we also have we had an invitation from Ownership to come to actually present to us, and that's something we'll be setting up. So there'll be an opportunity to actually then speak directly to Ownership as well.
Thank you, Sinead. I go now to Councillor Seamus Green.
Thank you, Chair. I was looking through the document and I have a habit of comparing the NI stats with the Fermanagh and Omagh stats. So just a few of them here. On planned maintenance, there's 143 million, 143.66 million spent across the north, of which there's 3.38 million spent in Fermanagh and Omagh. That equates to expenditure of in around 2.7%. Now, that there might be explanations for that, about housing stock and all, but Fermanagh and Omagh has slightly over 6% of the population. So there's 2.8% spent in Fermanagh and Omagh. So there's either a lack of housing in Fermanagh or a lack of spend on maintenance, or a bit of both. On planned investment in new build social housing, 306 million of a budget across the north. I think that is 24-25, of which 6.31 on new build was Fermanagh and Omagh. That's less than 2% of an expenditure on new build. So that's almost 2/3 of an underspend in Fermanagh and Omagh on new build. We go on ahead down then to social housing. There's 83,000 social houses in NI. There's 3,500 in Fermanagh and Omagh, which equates to slightly under 4% on my very quick maths. So on all of them things, and I haven't went through everything with a calculator, I went through them in my head, but I think I'm not far away on them. So we're 66% below the NI average on invest on building new social housing. So 66% below the NI average. On the planned maintenance, which there might be an explanation for, but we're slightly over 50% below expenditure in it compared to NI. And on social housing, we're 33% below the average of actually having social housing. So is there any explanation to that? And then if the chair maybe had let me in for one supplement.
Yep. Oh, after that, okay.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes. So yes, there is explanation. So I'll do my best to outline for you. So if I start, I'll ask Sinead to come in on the new build side. But if I start with on the landlord, okay, so and the fact that we have 83,000 properties, exactly as you said, and we have 3,500 locally, which we manage. So we publish our investment program, the amount that we spent every year, because we should. We're a public body, and so we publish our spend. And I'm always grateful to come here every year and tell you what we've spent in the last year. The downside of publishing an annual figure is that it kind of hides the fact that really when you're planning a very large planned maintenance program for a stock of 83,000, really that planned program is planned years in advance. And so Andy Kennedy, my colleague, is online tonight, and he puts together the program, and he will, on the basis of our stock condition, he will put together a program that is sometimes a 5-year program. And I'm sure if we had a longer term investment plan, we would like that to be 15 years ahead. And so what that means is it means that you have a well spread program over many years. And in some years, you will have a healthier or a more active program in one area. And then another part of Northern Ireland will catch up, another council area will catch up. So if I give you an example, 2-3 years, over the last 2 to 3 years, we've had a healthy, what we call ECM program, external cyclical maintenance. And so we've had a number of ECMs, a healthy program in the last 2 to 3 years. As a result, the program locally on ECMs isn't required in the last year. So we had a smaller program last year because we had a bigger program in the 2 years in advance of that. And that will be the same. And I answer quite rightly questions from councillors in other areas who will say, that looks down. Why is it down? Why are you spending less here? Well, normally it will be the case we're spending less in 1 year because we've spent it in previous years. But what I might just do, Andy, if you could, and I know obviously Nathan, who's our delivery lead locally, is also online and may want to come in on this point as well. But Andy, maybe just talk a little bit about how you put the programme together so that councillors can have that assurance that we're not overlooking this particular council area. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Grania. Yes, Councillor, as you've already said, for one thing, Fermanagh and Omagh has, of all of our 13 area offices, has one of the lowest stock. So even if we were dividing our investment out equally across all of our area offices, it would still have a fairly low amount. But as Grania said, over the long term, we do an annual planning exercise every year. We look at the condition of the stock, and particularly in terms of planned maintenance, we look at the extent of the backlogs in the various types of components that we address in our property. So heating, doors, windows, kitchens, bathrooms. And the fact is, over time, sometimes performance of contractors in some areas deliver better than others. So some areas can fall behind a bit. I wouldn't say that we don't have a backlog in Fermanagh and Omagh, we do. But compared to other areas, the extent of the backlog is much smaller in your council area than it would be in the others. So what we have to try and do is direct resources where we can try and equalize the extent of the backlog across all of our stock so that some areas are not suffering an extreme amount of backlog while others are really, almost on where they should be in terms of their kitchens and bathrooms being replaced. As I say, we revisit that every year when we're doing our what we call our programme roll-on, when we're projecting our forward 3-year programme, and we do a reassessment of that. So if there's a need to calibrate it or recalibrate it each year, we can do that. But as Grania give you the example of external cyclical maintenance, which is an item we had discussed before, I would have to say on that Fermanagh and Omagh is probably best placed in terms of having one of the lowest backlogs, and that would be reflected in some other components as well.
Okay, Councillor Green.
Well, there was 2 other components to the question.
So the new build programme, Sinead, again, we did cover this earlier on, but you might just want to just provide an overview of how we set the programme and the strategic guidelines. Thank you.
So the programme is put together, the annual programme or the 3-year programme, is put together each year based on the Housing Association scheme proposals, but it's shaped by the strategic guidelines targets, which ensures that the budget is targeted at areas of acute housing need. As I was saying earlier, this has been a change in picture over the past 5 years, and housing need in Fermanagh and Omagh has almost tripled over that time, and the programme has really changed to reflect this. So last year we completed 42 units, and we had 136 units on site, but we've over 200 units programmed over the next 3 years with an opportunity for in-year additions to that programme, and we'll continue to work with housing associations to bring forward and support scheme proposals across that area. So it does seem like a limited investment, but for last year, but that's really going to change in line with need over the next 3 years, and you'll see that coming through.
And lack of social stock, 83,000 across the NI. Is it that we don't need social stock here, or why are we again so low? And it is interesting, I suppose, before you come back in, that just so happens when I looked at the figures that this year happens to be a low year. I will request a copy of the last 10 years reports, just to go through them, just to see, was there big high spike years? I'm a complete cynic, and I don't believe there has been, because the figures on social housing kind of proves my point, because we are by far the lowest on the ladder for actually having social housing. So there was no way that we have ever been building enough houses. We've always been below because the actual amount of houses is below, is 33% below the NI average.
So just in relation to our own stock, the housing executive stock, so again, we're an 83,000 home landlord with 3,500 homes locally. That stock developed over many years. We're 50 years old, as more than 50 years old as an organisation. And in fact, when we were established, we had more than 200,000 properties in our portfolio. We're down to 83,000 because the house sales scheme is in effect, and so our tenants can purchase their properties. So the total number of housing executive homes at 83,000 is outside of our own control. What was also outside of our own control for the last 26 years is we haven't been allowed to add to our stock. So those are the numbers, and so we are not in control of the numbers of stock that we have. For that reason, we have the board of the housing executive has been very clear it would like to not sell its stock. As a landlord, we would prefer to retain it, but nevertheless, that policy remains the case. So the number of housing executive homes per council area is not something that the housing executive has control over, because we don't build, and B, we are mandated to sell our stock.
So Grania, and then I'll leave it at that. Are you saying then there was more, an average higher sell-off of stock in Fermanagh and Omagh, and that's why it is a lower level now?
I don't have the numbers, but those numbers are publicly available. We can certainly set.
Yeah, it'd be very useful to find that.
Yeah, but just to be clear, it's for each individual household to decide whether they purchase their property.
Yeah, I suspect the people in Fermanagh and Omagh didn't overbuy. I would, given that it's one of the poorer regions, I would be shocked if it was that there was more houses bought by tenants in Fermanagh and Omagh. So I think that argument falls down on that, but I'll wait on the figures to see.
Well, they're publicly available information, so we can certainly make sure you have them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I go now online to Councillor Colette McNulty. Colette?
Great, Harley, and thanks to the team for your presentation tonight. My question is just for clarity, Grania, please. Can you define ground maintenance? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So grounds maintenance is maintenance of the environment around our property. So it will tend to be green spaces. Ellen, is there anything you want to add to that in terms of how we put the programme together, or John?
Yeah, just in terms of our grounds maintenance, we have a new ground supervisor, just came into post last year, and we've spent a considerable amount of money over the last 12 months in Fermanagh and Omagh, and you might have seen some of the improvements around the town, especially in Shanton Park and other estates, and in Fox Park as well. And there's been numerous improvements being carried out, and especially in Fermanagh as well, in Lone Drive and Market Street. We have spent, grounds maintenance have gone in and totally revamped those areas, and I think the local councillors and the local communities have very much welcomed that, so they have. And if there's any areas that you feel that you would like us to have a look at, we certainly would, you know, in terms of seeing what improvements we could do. But I'm very pleased that we have been able to invest this money in the grounds and actually improving the local environments for our communities. Thank you.
Okay, thank you back in, Colette, there.
Yeah, thanks, Barry. Just the definition between housing executive, ground maintenance, and DFA. You know, do you just ring in and get clarity then from wherever you're ringing to see is it DFA maintained or housing executive maintained?
Yeah, well, I get loads of queries from councillors, you know, contacting me just to see is it our ground or is it a DFI ground. There's no rule about this here. It could be sometimes it's ours and sometimes it's grounds, and the same with paths and parking areas not there. There's, you know, we just need to check, and if you come to us, we can check anything at all and let you know whether it's ours or DFI ground.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Colette. I'll come back to the chamber now to Councillor Rosemary Barton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Can I also thank you, Grania, for your presentation? And Helen, can I also thank you over the last year or so for dealing with the queries that I have sent in to you in a very efficient manner. Thank you for that. Mine's a couple of queries. You said, Grania, that you wanted to acquire 600 properties for temporary accommodation in Fermanagh and Omagh. Where do you want to acquire them? Are you talking about rural-based properties? Are you talking about urban? Well, urban, I mean, Enniskillen and Omagh based. And in that district, are you looking at around the villages throughout the council district? That was the first question I wanted to mention to you. The second thing you talked about, building perhaps in the future, hopefully you would be building a new supply of homes. I'm sure you are aware of the restrictions we have with infrastructure now for the building of new homes. So how are you working at the moment? How are you working to make sure that when the money comes through, that everything will be straightforward without any hiccups waiting on new sewage systems to be upgraded, etc., and various other pieces of infrastructure that need to be upgraded. And the third thing is, can I just ask about windows? I did hear one day I was out and about in Omagh here, and while it's not my area, it was just mentioned to me that there are still some single glazed windows. Am I right? And what are the intentions to try and get them at least up to double glaze or triple glaze? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So in the 600 units, yes, so that's 600 units across Northern Ireland, so it's across all 11 council areas. And so that was a position or proposition that we made to the Department for Communities, which they agreed to. We are funding that from the Housing Executive Reserves, so we spend that very cautiously, as you can well imagine. Every penny that's not going into our own homes, our own stock, is something that we only do with the greatest of caution. So we are currently putting together the criteria to answer your question in relation to where those 600 homes will come from. They'll obviously need to come from areas where there is need for temporary accommodation. Depressingly, that's everywhere, as we know, as I've already said this evening, across all 11 council areas. We will obviously be looking for temporary accommodation, I suppose that is of the greatest value for public money. So there will be a set of criteria that we will want to use. It is likely that we will want to acquire stock that is high quality stock, so we're not having to make it a huge investment commitment. So we're in the process of putting those criteria together, and it may well be that we're in touch with councils on an individual basis once we have further information on that. And certainly we will want to be looking at where we think there might be opportunities at a pre-market level. So in other words, before something goes in the market, and obviously if it's public sector stock as well, there may well be opportunities for us. So like any organisation that's seeking to acquire properties, we'll need to be able to move with agility on that one. So we may well come back to council with further information at officer level in due course once we've put those together. Yes, I mean, the restriction on new homes, I mean, once the Housing Executive is at a position whereby it is able to add to new supply, in a way we'll be like anybody else in the sense that we will be working with the restrictions that are in front of us. What I would certainly want to be doing is being in a position whereby we're either building on our own land, or indeed as part of a public partnership, either with a council or with another public body. And obviously at the early stage in any development, you would be looking at those restrictions and are there ways in which we can work around those. What I should say is we have been working on a site-by-site basis and working very closely with associations as well, and Northern Ireland Water to unlock where there are wastewater capacity issues, and we have seen some successes in the last year. So I suppose the shortest answer I have to your question is we will be working very closely as early as possible with all of those infrastructure bodies to make sure that we can unlock constraints as early as possible. That would obviously have a determining impact on those sites that we choose to develop. If we felt the constraint was going to be too great or was going to prolong a development with limited budget, I think we probably would be looking elsewhere. So that will certainly have a material bearing. On the issue of windows, either Helen or maybe other colleagues will want to come in.
I would come in and just answer that one there. We have no single glazed windows in this area, and if we do, I have not ever been aware of them, but as far as we're concerned, ours are all double glazed.
Well, I'll come back to you on that, Helen.
Yeah, well,
No,
if there's one that you've become
privately.
aware of, that we're not aware of, but as far as we're concerned, we have them all double glazed. And the same with all our plan schemes not there. Like, it's my job to fight the corner of the southwest area, and I know that the plant maintenance and program delivery will look at, the roll on and look at how many years ago it was before a kitchen went in or a bathroom went in, and then we're programmed in accordingly. And I have a meeting, I'm in Craigavon this Wednesday morning going through our program again. Every 3 months I go, meet with our program delivery people, and we go through the program to see what's on it. And it's my job to make sure that I fight for our area, to make sure that we're not overlooked and that everything is done as, in our turn, that we have the same turn as everybody else.
See that Andy's
Thank
looking
you.
in. I wonder, is this a relevant point for Andy? Andy Kennedy from the Housing Executive online. Thank you, Andy.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll just build on what Helen's saying. Some of the councillors may remember that about 12, 13 years ago, the Programme for Government had a target to ensure that all social housing had double glazing. And in the next 4 or 5 years after that, we implemented a huge programme to change over our stock, any that was single glazed over to double glazed. There were perhaps a couple of thousand that were outstanding at the time. But as Helen said, I would be fairly confident that we have picked all of those up over the years. And as she said, if you do know any addresses, please let us know. And I certainly, along with Helen, will have it checked out.
Thank you.
Okay, that's very interesting, Rosemary, that you might have 1 or 2 examples in mind and that you will bring it to their attention. And I would agree with you on your thanks to Helen for her responsiveness in terms of correspondence through the year. I think that all of us feel that. So we'll move on now. I think everything has been addressed in your questions, Rosemary. There's great interest here on the part of councillors, both in the chamber and online. So I have a sequence of speakers here and I'm doing it fairly. 1 in the chamber, 1 online, 1 in the chamber, 1 online. So next up is Councillor Coyle, Debbie Coyle.
Thanks, Chair and Gráinne and Helen and the team. And I've just got a few points. I'm going to quickly go through them all, and hopefully you can respond to them. I read on the hate crime report that was sent out that the figures that were on there only go up to 1920. So for that year, they obviously dropped. I'm guessing because of COVID. And I appreciate they were PSNI figures and not your own. But since then, if the news is anything to go by, and if, working with people and various reports, that there has been an increase in hate crime and in particular racism. Can I ask if you have found this to be the case more locally? I know we were at an event in Omagh where it's brought up there, and worry about it getting worse. So are you worried about it are you finding it in a local council area within the housing executive estates, other social housing estates, or in the private sector? So that's my first point. The second point is the around the contractors. And I know I've been in contact with you recently, Helen, about one particular person, but there's been a couple. Is there an issue with the contractors, and how do you deal with that? Because we've been getting complaints that the contractors firstly are not turning up, and then they're turning up without the proper tools, or they're not completing the work. They're going away and they haven't completed everything that they come to do. And just wondering, is that an ongoing issue with contractors, and what you propose to do about that? Just a comment on the migration to universal credit, because I know a lot of people have been contacting us now, and I'm in the I help people every week doing this, and as we're getting closer to Christmas, more and more people with the Christmas holidays and departments taking holidays, it's just, are you kind of gonna make allowances, I suppose, or be mindful that some people are going to get into rent arrears very quickly over the Christmas period through no fault of their own. And obviously, there could be generated letters go out, which yourself often stresses people out, but that they'll be reassured that they'll be okay until their benefits is sorted out. The other thing I wanted to say to you is I was glad to see within the plan about traveller sites, and it's good to see that progress is being made. However, there's still nothing for the Fermanagh and Omagh area, and we do get travellers coming in who have asked about the development of a site in our council area, and I know we've had issues within our council area where travellers have come in and just set up somewhere random and in a town or a village. And is there any looking forward into the future, is there that's something that we will be looking at to provide that in our council area for travellers? And the last thing I just wanted to say, just thanks to the housing executive and the support from supporting communities, because I suppose I could have mentioned that at the beginning, but the community cohesion funding and the community involvement grants, certainly in my experience anyway, as a volunteer within the community, does result in reducing antisocial behaviour and increases community involvement. And the with interagency meetings, I sit on the Southwest Area Housing Forum and the Housing Community Networks, where Helen comes and other agencies come and support.
I could just help you, Debbie, to come to a conclusion, if you could come to a conclusion.
Yeah, I will come to a conclusion.
Yeah.
So I wanted to say thank you for that, because the others were questions about going forward, but really to thank the housing executive for the work through supporting communities, for the work that they actually do on the ground within the communities as well. So I wanted to get that in as well. But if you could answer the other questions, please, I'd be appreciated.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you. Very happy to, and I'll turn to Helen and colleagues for some of these. On the issues of hate crime, obviously, generally speaking, yes, we have seen an increase in the numbers, and we obviously will maintain very strong oversight of where there have been threats either to our tenants, our residents, our communities and our staff. Helen will want to come in just in terms of her own view locally. On contractors, yes, I'm kept briefed very, very effectively by the teams in relation to any contractor performance issues. We discuss them regularly. We discuss them in advance of this meeting, obviously this evening. Helen, again, will want to come in on any local contractor issues, and I'm sure Nathan online will also want to talk about how we manage issues of performance in relation to contractors. We have a very well-established set of approaches in relation to contract management. It is a contract, it is a legal document, and we will manage those very effectively on behalf of our tenants. And what I should have also said, and you mentioned this, Councillor, our Housing Community Network is very active locally and holds us to account, as they should do. In fact, they had their community conference last week, which I attended, and our tenants, it's their rent we spend, and quite understandably they want to know what's in the programme, how that's balanced across all of the areas, what that will be spent on, and the quality of contractors. And I think it's a model of tenant scrutiny and resident scrutiny, and it in fact is held up outside of Northern Ireland as a model, and rightly so. On the migration to universal credit, you're absolutely right. The risk of rent arrears and financial exclusion as a result of that transition is something that exercises us. We've had a number of briefings, including to the Housing Executive Board, on how we do that. Obviously, we are obliged to follow the policy set by DWP, Department for Work and Pensions, in relation to that migration. So we are somewhat constrained and limited in relation to whether we could take any discretionary measures at key times in the year. However, as a landlord, we have invested very heavily in financial inclusion work, so that everybody, all of our tenants, if they have concerns about the migration to UC, or indeed more generally in relation to financial inclusion, or debt or rent arrears, through our patch manager, they are referred to our financial inclusion team, and that team has made a really, has done a really excellent job of working with our tenants to meet, to be able to avail of any benefits, discretionary or otherwise, that are available to them. And obviously, you've mentioned the fact that traveller and traveller accommodation is a priority of ours. It remains one. It's in our corporate strategy. It's something that I personally keep a very close eye on, and I know Helen has done a huge amount of work locally. So Helen, I might just pass over to you for some of the rest of those issues then.
Okay. Councillor Coyle, in terms of hate crimes, no, we don't have a big issue locally. We would have the odd reports, but nothing that would be the same reflective of the rest of Northern Ireland. In terms of our response maintenance contractor, yes, we do have issues, and I have reported this back to several of the councillors who have come to me with concerns about work not being carried out and not being carried out in time, and contractor going away. We are working on that. We meet weekly with the contractor. We meet monthly at a regional level. John McCartan, our assistant director, has been involved. We've escalated it, and at this moment in time, we are working with the contractor to see how he can resolve the issues that he has. But yes, it is something that we're working very hard to resolve, and that work will be ongoing, because obviously we want to ensure that our tenants get the repairs carried out when they require them. So, you know, it is something that we hopefully we will get a resolution in the coming weeks to see improvements in that there. In terms of the migration to universal credit, 41% of our tenants locally have migrated over to universal credit, and there has been a significant increase in the last couple of months, because we know that the migration has been speeded up. And we are working very closely with our tenants. As soon as we become aware that their housing benefit is stopping, we're getting in touch with those tenants and giving them help and support in terms of how to get online, how to make their application for their housing costs, and then subsequently, separately, their application for their rates rebate. So anybody comes to you with any issues, please ask them to come to their patch manager, and they're more than willing to help them, you know, to look at their journal and to help them, assist them in terms of their application. In terms of travellers, we have been working very closely with travellers in the Omagh area with regards to trying to establish a traveller movement. And we have received funding for a part-time worker who is actually going through a process of making applications and trying to get the funding together so we can get employed people from the travelling community, because it has to be a traveller-led movement, and that they will help to influence how a traveller site would develop within the area. As Grania has said, it's part of our strategy. Our corporate plan is to look at the development and inclusion of travellers, and especially about the creation of traveller site. And again, Sinead in Place Shapers is well aware of this here and attends meetings and all that there to try and progress this. And thank you very much for your comments in terms of the staff and the community grants.
Okay, thank
That's
you.
lovely. Thank you.
Okay, move on now to Councillor Feely. And just to commend Councillor Feely on his role in Garrison on Saturday at a tree planting. Both myself and Councillor Feely and Councillor Gannon were there. And I think in terms of naturalness with the spade, Anthony won handsomely, you know. Certainly the applause of his community reflected that. He was very handy with the spade, you know. Okay, over to Councillor Feely.
Thanks, Chair. I don't know whether that's a good compliment or not, say it was handy for spade or shovel. It just shows the kind of man your work have you had. But thanks for that, Barry. No, and thanks, Grania and Sinead and the staff for coming down there. And Debbie has touched on one of the issues I was going to talk about, but I would have brought it up at our own meeting about maintenance with Debbie, so she has touched on that. So I just want to ask another few questions about that, about the maintenance. Is the housing sector, does all the maintenance be contracted out, or have you staff of your own that do some of the work? For I know if you're getting contractors in, subbies and that, they tell you to be there next Tuesday and they wouldn't come to the following Tuesday. I understand that, but I just was wondering, have our own staff, because housing sector own staff, because there's just one issue. They told a lady, and I'm not saying names, what areas, that they're going to come and do the job on such a day. And she did wait the whole day for them and they never arrived. And she had a special needs child and they couldn't get out there waiting the whole day. And this happened on 3 different occasions, you know, which was, it was, and I know it's probably not your fault, it could have been a subby that told her that now, but we'd want to be sure that people's not waiting for workmen to come and don't arrive then, you know, so I was just wondering that. And the other issue about the single glazed homes that Rosie mentioned there, I do know of a house, it's either going to be the new windows are coming in maybe soon, but they still have single glazed windows in their house. It's them cottages out in the countryside, you know, there used to be an acre of ground around them. I think they were called labourers cottages, there are a few of them scattered about, and it's one of them, you know, it's still a single glaze, but I'm nearly sure they're going to get it done soon, so I must just get back to that, the man that spoke about it there, and see would we get it up, speeding up a wee bit. And I've another wee issue with anti-social behaviour, but I don't want to talk about it in form. I chat to some of the ladies after, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Councillor, thank you. Yes, so we have obviously our planned maintenance programme and our response maintenance programme, which I gave you the figures for there, and it's all in the report. In terms of our response maintenance, we do have our own NIHE Direct, which is our own team internally, our maintenance teams, and they work in 3 areas across Northern Ireland. So they don't have a presence here in this council area, so we use local contractors or contractors for both our response and our planned maintenance. It's not unusual for landlords. We just take a balanced view of how much you need your own teams versus contractors, and some of it is also down to local availability, as in the local economy, what's available from a contracting point of view. All of that said, what is very, very important from our point of view as a landlord is that all of our contractors meet the targets that we set for them. We have regular meetings with all contractors, monthly meetings with all contractors, and so where they're not performing, and the example that you gave is unacceptable, quite frankly, to have a tenant waiting and not have that work being undertaken, that will be flagged with the contractor. And I suppose what we will always say is the more we can know and the more we can understand about contractor performance, because we can't be everywhere, we will always take those seriously. And I know both in terms of our local office and the local team, that's something we take very seriously. And it may be useful, just Nathan, to have you just give an overview of the kind of steps that we take when we're managing contractor performance, just to give you that assurance and reassurance locally. Nathan, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Grania. Hi, everybody. In terms of managing performance of contractors, each month we would sort of manage their performance expected against what their actual performance should be. So whether they may be appointments kept on time, customer satisfaction and the like. If those appointments are not met, we apply KPI, low service damages accordingly. Okay, so what's key is obviously tracking that performance. And as I said, we do that each month. We have real-time data as well, which we keep an eye on. We also rely on tenant feedback and tenant insights. So any complaints, we take those seriously. And if there's anything like that there, please do send them through so we can address it. But probably the wider piece as well is that there is an ongoing labour shortage in Northern Ireland. And I think that is widely recognised across Northern Ireland. We're doing our bit in the Housing Executive by adopting social value within our contracts and bringing in apprenticeships and into our contracts. So every point spent through our contracts, contractors are using that money to bring in apprenticeships. So we're hoping to build the industry as best we can there too. Just some of the other things is we're trying to improve communication with our contractors as well. But as I say, we'll have our monthly meetings, our weekly meetings. We're keeping on top of the curve to see what's going on, and we're promoting training with our contractors and working collaboratively with one another to try and get ahead of the curve, as I say.
Okay, thanks, Nathan. And back to you, Grania, if you wish.
Well, I suppose just to add as well, as Nathan has said, our tenants are so key to this. And again, our housing community network, our tenants who are organised locally play a really, really important role in feeding that information to us so that we can, and I have to say, whether it's our local tenants or indeed the chair of the Central Housing Forum also meets with our contractors, and there's nothing like looking a group of tenants in the eye as well to reiterate the importance of contractor performance. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go online now, and just to say, Mark, your other commitment and apologies was noted in Garrison on Saturday, but I was wondering, would you be good with a spade? That's what I was wondering.
Probably wouldn't be as handy as Anthony, Chair.
Okay, we'll proceed now to Councillor Evans for his questions or comments.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And I suppose just to make it clear, I mean, I'm here in my capacity as Aaron West councillor. I don't think my other role has any conflict with this, so I will keep my, well, it's a comment and it's then a specific question specifically to Aaron West. I suppose, Gráinne, the first comment would be, and it's been reflected by many speakers already, but I just want to commend the team you have on the ground at Fermanagh. Just as an example, I recently contacted Helen. It was late one night about a matter that had been raised with me by a constituent. Before 8 o'clock the next morning, Helen came back to me with her initial assessment. Later that day, she came back with a further assessment. And then that constituent who contacted me in the recent weeks rang me again on just Friday evening past, just to thank me and to thank the housing executive for a job well done. So there was a very good and a very swift and effective response on that issue. So, I mean, I do think you have a good manager on the ground here, and I think we are grateful for that. And then, Gráinne, I suppose the specific question would be, and this was a question I've been asked maybe in the last week or 10 days, and I reflected that I thought this meeting was happening or was scheduled within the council, so I sort of gave a commitment to ask the question at this meeting. It's the issue of, and it sort of straddles Aaron West and Enniskillen, but it's right. I think it's in Enniskillen, but it's right on the boundary with Aaron West. But it's the issue of the Grosvenor Barracks in Enniskillen. A big site, I think it's around 20 acres in there, was bought previously, from memory, I think it was around maybe £15 million. So it was quite a significant purchase by presumably the housing executive or whoever it was that bought it at the time. But I was just asked whether I knew what the plans were with that. I know there's been a little bit of work done maybe on the sidelines. Some buildings have perhaps been upgraded, but the site, as far as I know, when I drive past that site regularly, it's just completely overgrown. But so, Gráinne, it would just be the touch base to see where we are with the development of Grosvenor, and whether, I know it's in for planning, it may well have passed for planning, but is it like so many other sites caught up with this issue of sewerage infrastructure? That's me, Chair. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Councillor, thank you for that and for your comments. And it's always wonderful as a chief executive to be meeting councils and hearing about local teams. And Helen is absolutely phenomenal member of the team. And I'm always delighted to get that positive feedback. So thank you for that. And I'll pass you on to Sinead just in relation to Grosvenor Barracks. She'll be much closer to the detail than I would be. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, so the housing executive participated in the DFC-led steering group for the redevelopment of Grosvenor Barracks, which is actually in DFC ownership. The site has outline planning permission for 200 units, and the primary objective there is to achieve a mixed tenure housing development. So the housing executive has supported 60 units of social housing across 2 phases. So work is ongoing at the minute to resolve a number of pre-development issues and to discharge the conditions of the outline planning approval. DFC are working with the steering group to develop a development brief for the site and the necessary procurement templates. And the hope is that this will go out to tender in the new year.
Okay, Mark, you want to come back in? Are you happy enough?
No, that's fine. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Move on now back to the chamber till Councillor Dermot Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, you're all very welcome. I want to go back to the very first thing that the chairperson said, and that is, where are our young people going to live? And that is, I think, such a crucial issue, because I think we can all see a generation being locked out of permanent home ownership, particularly people in their 20s and 30s, but most of all single people in their 20s and 30s. I think that we see rents rising, we see house prices rising, and of course that impacts on deposits and people not being able to afford a deposit. I think one of the things which is not happening is homes which are being built are not suitable for young single people. I think we're seeing a lot of homes being built for families and for elderly people and things, but there's a gap in the market, I feel, for young single people. And I know you've talked about concepts like co-ownership and the intermediate rent, but why are we not seeing that gap in the market, as it were, to be filled? Why are developers not coming in and supplying the homes which are needed? as opposed to the homes which they think will be profitable for them, I suppose. So if you could answer that, perhaps I do have a supplementary then, Chair, if that's all
Yeah,
right.
but just on that, in your own view, what is suitable accommodation for single young people? Is it?
Well, you're talking about one bed, two beds, sort of multiple occupation, sort of that's the sort of thing that we're talking about, not, you know, family homes for three or four bedrooms. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. And so I will hand over to Sinead, who understands the market here and housing need locally. But if I, just before I do, again, we publish all of the data that we collect and gather on housing need and on the housing market we publish. We've actually just brought back a publication this year that we used to publish and we'd stopped putting it online over the number of years just for resource issues, but we've been able to publish it, called the Housing Market Review. And that goes into housing need at a right down to council level and even beyond that, more detail. And it splits all of the different tenures. So it would answer your question as to what is needed in this local area. There's a lot of the data in the plan that's in front of you tonight, but it will also give you that breakdown between the number of homes we need for single people as well as the homes for families. And it's that data that we use in our support or otherwise for planning applications. So if a planning application is being made and we feel we can't support it because it would, for example, build the wrong type of home, might be in the right place, but it might be the wrong type of home, then we will regularly do that. And in fact, we will regularly, as a statutory consultee, give our view to planning teams as to the right balance between homes for single people, homes for families. So we are very proactive in that space, but we're only able to do that because we have the data and Sinead's teams do that. So Sinead, you might just give a little bit more flavour of the balance of need locally. Thank you.
Yes, so I mean, in Fermanagh at the minute, there at March 2025, there were 2,296 applicants on the waiting list who required a home. 1,592 of those were deemed to be in housing stress. Now, single person households made up 49% of the waiting list, and small family households made up 22%. So obviously there's a need for small unit accommodation in the programme. So when we support new build schemes, that support is based on the profile of the household groups on the waiting list. But we also have to strike a balance with the long-term sustainability of that scheme as well. You know, singles are quite a transient household group. So we will support an element of 1 and 2 bed apartments within any scheme, but we'll also support 2 and 3 bed houses, sometimes 4 bed houses as well. And we'll try to include 10% of wheelchair accommodation within a scheme also to meet the strategic targets. The type of accommodation that we support will also be based on the location of the scheme, and we're more likely to support apartments that are closer to the town centre. But with every scheme, we do keep account of the household breakdown, and obviously the profile of the waiting list being heavily swayed towards singles. But that is only social housing. I can understand the frustration with the wider market, and obviously market housing will be more family led, and that's something that that's a balance that needs to be addressed probably more so in this council area.
Now, I'm going to bring Councillor Green back in a minute or two. Sorry, I should allow Dermot, yes. Here's what I'm going to do. Dermot's supplementary. I'll put on your mic now in a minute. And then I'm going to go till Councillor Nolene Hayes and then Councillor Errol Thompson. And then I'm going to bring in Councillor Green again. Okay, so I want to go till Dermot now.
Thank you for your answer there. And I suppose, I think we're in agreement there that the housing executive can do what it can in the social housing stock, but we also are not facing that problem in the private rental. That's a gap which developers are not meeting. I suppose I touched on deposits as being a big issue. People are not in the financial wherewithal to gather up vast sums of money for deposits, whether it be for a private rental or for a private or a full-time home. But what influence does the housing executive have to influence policy with the department in terms of things like rent support schemes, deposit schemes, or support for first-time buyers? Because you do great work with social housing, and I know you're responsible for social housing, but we do have a big issue with the private rental sector as well, which seems to be unmet. And I just wonder what influence you have to sort of influence policy in that area. Thank you.
And just before you do, I think, Dermot, you have a good understanding of the issues. Earlier today, when Sinead and Alan and I met, we also met with a locally based estate agent. And I think you're right on the money there with regard to the issues. He said, for example, young people might go to Australia for 3 or 4 years to gather up the price of a deposit. So back to you, Grania.
Yes, so I suppose just to go back to your previous question as well, and just to underscore what Sinead had said. So we will advise planning authorities on all tenures. So if a development if a developer is seeking planning permission and we don't support the mix, for example, that mix of either private to social to intermediate, or indeed, and it will have to obviously be part of the local development plan and planning policies, or indeed if the development isn't going to strike the right balance in terms of that need for single versus families, we will object if we have a view, if we feel it won't support housing need locally. So we do have a cross tenure role as a statutory consultee. We don't just give advice on social housing. You're absolutely right. The broader point you make is, and it comes back to, I think, what a number of colleagues have said tonight, which is how you get the balance right between the tenures. And fundamentally, we have not had enough choice in our housing system for many years in Northern Ireland, so that people were forced to go into the private rented sector. And as a result, the private rented sector grew, demand grew, and as a result, then that pushed up rents because there was only so many homes. And we are seeing this now. That housing market review that we published this year showed the average rent across all council areas has increased in the last number of years. So every council area has seen a growth in rent. So our influence, to answer your question, to the department is through that review, giving them the data, allowing them to see what the impact of that is. We certainly advise them in relation to the operation of the private rented sector, regulation of the private rented sector. But we've also been working very closely with them and others on, so we fund a small number of pieces of work in terms of homelessness prevention, so tenancy deposit schemes, for example. We'd like to do more. Our prevention budget has been very, very low for a number of years, and we've a larger prevention budget this year, so we're being as strategic as we possibly can in relation to that. But certainly, and there's a programme of work which we're involved in to prevent homelessness amongst care leavers. And one aspect of that work, I think you will see more funding come forward for tenancy deposit schemes. So you're absolutely right. Access to the private rented sector is really, really important. But once you're there, we do need a more regulated private rented sector, so that we have a little bit more, so that we certainly have more influence over rent. I'll come back to my final to the earlier point though, which is intermediate housing is a form of affordable rent, and we really do need to see more of it. Thank you.
Okay. Affordable rent equals intermediate housing. Writing that down just for myself. Okay, move now to Councillor Nolene Hayes.
Hello, thank you, Chair, and thanks, Grania, and your team for that presentation. I'd also like to add my thanks to Helen too, who is very, very responsive in any time I ever send her an email with or phone call, and that's very much appreciated. But coming back to, it is a maintenance issue, but really relationship between the housing executive and their tenants are maintenance issues, because by the time they come to a councillor, they're normally already very frustrated. And it's a time of year now, you're going to get issues with the heating breaking down, damp issues, cold, all these things that happen every winter. And what I'm finding, unfortunately, is when tenants are coming to me, constituents, is that they're either not getting through to the housing executive, or when they have to explain their issue over and over again to different people. They never seem to get a prompt call back, and if they call back in, the cycle happens again. And that's the main thing that I want to ask about. I did notice in the document under your customer charter and your performance 24-25 yourself, yourselves have put in that in the complaints, your aim to answer first stage complaints within 10 days is 37%. And your with the final stage complaints, it's 12%. And you even note in the document that that's really quite low. Now, I do think, and I hope you can clarify that when you say complaints, is that formal complaints? Because I dealt with a formal complaint a few months ago, and it took nearly 3 months to get a final stage sort of answer. So really, it's that relationship between your tenants and yourselves when they initially call with an issue. You know, what are you? I'm not pertaining that when it comes to the council, and I contact Helen and even maintenance managers, things like that. The relationship's very good, and you're very good at responding, but you don't seem to be very good on the other end of the phone with tenants. Well, that's what I'm hearing by the time they come to me either. So what are you doing to improve that element specifically, please?
Thank you. And it's an area of significant focus across the organisation, our ability to respond. Our customer service unit, we set very clear targets, both in relation to response times, answering calls and responding to. So again, I'm very, very happy if you'd like to follow up with us either in relation to specifics, Councillor, because I suppose what you've talked about this evening, I suppose there will certainly be instances where there's no question we can improve our service, but I have to say we also focus very heavily. We've just had a customer service excellence accreditation or audit, and we have continued to improve our annual performance. So, you know, your perception is your reality. So I would like to hear more, quite frankly, and I would certainly be concerned that your experience suggests to be one of worsening performance on our part when actually the data would suggest otherwise. So I would be very keen that we follow up on this. I might ask John McCartan also just to touch on this issue as well, because, you know, our relationship with our tenants, as I've mentioned a number of times, we have a very well established housing community network. Our tenants will feedback very honestly and openly with us in relation to our performance, but they also are part of that customer service excellence assessment. And so, John, I might just ask you to come in on some of those points around our CSU and some of the steps we've been taking. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Grania. We have a very well established process where somebody wishes to report a repair or where there's an issue with regards to a repair. Our tenants can avail of that. They can do it online. They can do it through the tenant portal. They can do it outside normal office hours through our emergency services as well. In the South region, our customer service unit, which is the main avenue that people take to report repairs, they would take on average about 10,000 calls a month. They're measured on each of them calls. They're measured in terms of duration. They're measured in terms of how quickly they respond. They're measured then in terms of how effective they are. They're measured in real time, but they're also measured at the end of the month. And there's KPIs, key performance indicators set that they have to achieve certain standards and certain minimum performance targets. So it's all measured fairly tight. I certainly want to hear more about the experience and where it seems to have gone wrong and why it's gone wrong. When they ring in, part of the process then is, first of all, to identify the nature of the repair, and they have a diagnostic system and they'll try and zero in on the exact nature of the repair so that when they're putting it out to the contractor, it's as clear as possible and saves time in terms of trying to identify what the issue is. They'll inform them what priority has been given, whether it's an emergency, whether it's an urgent, or whether it's a response, or whether it's going to need a visit. So that all takes place as part of that phone call. The tenant's advised of that, and it then goes out to the contractor. It's up to the contractor at that point to make contact with the tenant. Now, if it's an emergency, they do that within a number of hours, so it's immediate. If it's an urgent, which is 4 days, or a response, which is 15 days, they'll then phone to make an appointment and tell them when they'll be calling out. We would also, in terms of the contractor, If there's issues with the contractor, that information is gathered as well, and that's reported on a monthly basis. So if a tenant rings into us and says this repair wasn't done right, or they didn't show up, or they didn't make a phone call, that information is all pulled together, and at the end of the month, that forms one of the key performance indicators for the contractor. And we would then, at our monthly performance meeting, would be setting out saying, here's what the data is telling us, here's the individual cases where it's failed. We need an explanation as to why it went wrong and where it went wrong. So there's a fairly strong process built up around it. We don't always get it right, absolutely accept that. But we do want to hear where it has failed or where it hasn't reached the standards that we would expect. So I would certainly appreciate after this in the next couple of days if you get in touch and could get a few details in regards to it. We'll follow up on it.
Okay. That's
Yeah.
Councillor Hayes content there.
Chair, just like to say thanks for that. I mean, obviously, in the context of things, normally when they approach the local councillor, it's because they haven't been able to resolve the issue between yourselves and it. You know what I mean? So I'm not saying that this is happening all the time, but it does happen, and especially in the winter months, and especially with the heating. There's a heating department that they're told, oh, we have to consult with the heating department and we'll get back to you. And that's the circle that they go around for days and days, and then they finally contact the councillor. But again, in context, and I will say that when I do contact Helen and the maintenance team, the response is very, very good. It's just that connection there in the beginning, which I just think, in a few cases should be looked at. But thank you for your response, and thank you, Chair.
Okay, and thanks, John, for that intervention. Thank you. Moving on now to Councillor Thompson, Councillor Earl Thompson.
Thank you very much, Chair. And a lot of valid points have been made this evening. Thanks for letting me in. And apologies that I'm not in the chamber. I just couldn't be there this evening. First of all, can I welcome Grania down to the Greens this evening? Again, it's good to see you down, Grania, and your team. I'd like to obviously put in record again my best thanks to Helen as Southwest Manager and her team locally for all their work. And I always say this at every time we have this annual meeting, that Helen will always give you a direct answer, whether it's what you want to hear or not. So take that on board, Helen. But anyway,
I agree with you, Earl. Helen does answer us, but it's not.
Helen is
always what we want
direct.
to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. I had issues last year to do with Storm Eowyn, and I know there were roof tiles missing the houses and things like that. And I heard what Councillor Hayes had just said there, just with regard to maybe people not coming back in a timely manner. But I contacted Helen, and Helen had that issue resolved within hours, and that was in 2 different locations. So that's just an example of what Helen can do at her level. Further on, just with regard to interagency meetings and estate inspections, I want to commend the Northern Ireland Housing Executive for turning up at those. A lot of the other agencies are not present, which is unfortunate when you're trying to deal with constituency matters on the ground. So I want to put that on record as well. Just with another thing there to do with updated contact list, and I know we generally say this each year, we require an updated contact list. That would be good, because I'm aware that maybe some of the patch managers may have changed, and maybe someone are about to retire. So maybe that's another thing can be taken on board there as well. Just one other issue, Chair, if you allow me.
Yep.
And that's, I know we're moving into the late autumn and into winter period, and all those issues have been mentioned, but it's just with generally over the year, the grass cutting in the housing executive estates in around Omagh. I'm just wondering how many times how many cuts are we getting there now, or is that likely to increase? Because that's another thing you get complaints about. Obviously not this time of year, but spring and summer. So thanks for letting me in there, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Earl.
Thank you. Yes, so I will hand over to Helen just in relation to grass cutting.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson, in terms of the grass cutting, no, the grass cutting is only, it's done, the contract hasn't changed, so it's the same amount of times each year. I think it's 4 times. Maybe, John, you'd like to come in there, but as far as I'm aware, it's 4 times in the year that the grass cutting is carried out, but there has been no change from previous years.
Okay. The way the contract's set up with grounds maintenance is that we set a standard in terms of what height the grass shouldn't go beyond. So it's set on a number of occasions, as Helen said, but it's also on the basis that when it needs to be done, to keep it within that minimum standard. So it's based more around that. So 4 would be your norm, but it can be more frequent. At the start of the growth season, yes, you get spurts of growth, and sometimes depend upon the spring and the way that the growing season kicks in. You can often find that the contractor has just initial difficulty trying to get on top of it, and sometimes it can take them longer than they should. It's also depending on the weather as well. If it's a particular wet time of year, then they can't put the heavy machinery and things on, so that affects it as well. But it's set on a minimum standards. They've also, in terms of, they're looking at in terms of nature positives and things. So there may be areas where we're looking at now in terms of moving forward in terms of environmental sustainability and biodiversity, where we're looking at maybe there's areas where we needn't necessarily be cutting it just as frequently. It might only be 1 cut or 2 cuts a year, but it's not where it's being neglected. It's where it's being managed, but in a different way. We work with the local communities in that to explain to them what we're doing, why we're doing it, and get their buy-in as well. So we're coming at it in a variety of ways.
I suppose, if you allow me, Chair, thanks for your answer there, John. It's just with regard to if the grass gets too long, and those grass, you've said 4 times there, I'll take on board what Helen said as well there, 4 times a year, and if necessary, it might be more. But if it gets too long, and I know the policy is to leave the grass where it is once it's cut, not take it away, then it gets a really, really untidy place. And we get a lot of complaints with regard to that. So maybe if those issues can be taken on board and maybe try and resolve them in some fashion, it'll be appreciated. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Errol, we'll move back to the chamber here. Councillor Green, then Councillor Brown. And if any other councillors wanted, a brief intervention at the end, you're welcome. Okay, Councillor Green.
Thank you. This was actually the question I came down to ask in the first place, so and I got waylaid on the percentages. There's in the Irish Republic, there's vacant property refurbishment grants of €50,000 and derelict properties grants of €70,000. Now, in my opinion, if the housing executive could come up with a similar scheme for vacant properties and derelict properties, it would make a huge indent into the housing list, because let's not forget, these properties nearly all have sewage infrastructure. A lot of them has electricity, a lot of them has water. So to get them back into use again would be a huge benefit to the area or to the north. So I'm just wondering, is there anything in line to do that? Because I think it could be a game changer if that was done. Because I know in the south, I have close connections up there, and I know the amount of properties that has been brought back into use is incredible. And so just on that.
found a point of complete agreement. So yes, I strongly agree. Both vacant property grants and derelict property grants, or whatever our version of those would be in due course, I think would make a huge difference. There is derelict property legislation coming on stream actually, and that will, in fact, we're about to discuss it this week in our own executive team, and I think that will give opportunities for strategic partnerships between councils and the housing executive and other public bodies to look at how we can bring back into use public goods, whether they're a public good, whether it's a physical asset like a home or a derelict property. So I think there's a lot to be optimistic about in the future in this decade. You're absolutely right. I think the fact that there tends to be infrastructure inbuilt within most of those properties immediately, kind of adds to the value for money argument as to why you would invest there. We are, as the provider of grants to properties, our role is to administer those grants. So the policy for those is set by the Department for Communities. So I would suggest a conversation with the department in due course in relation to that. But certainly the derelict property legislation coming forward, I think, I suppose bodes well for the future. And I agree with you. I think we do need a game changer in terms of bringing properties back into use.
And I would encourage you, Councillor Green, and you, Grania, to keep your focus on that. It's very important. Dermot, I haven't heard from Stephen yet, so I'll go to Stephen then yourself. Councillor Stephen Donnelly.
Thank you very much, Chair, and apologies for attending late. I had additional commitments. And just to say, actually, that Councillor Roof communicated his apologies to me before the meeting, so just to put that there. Can I say thank you for the team, actually? I mean, there's been a huge amount of useful information. I mean, I think these engagements are always worthwhile, so I appreciate the team being here tonight. Just one small question out of curiosity, based off of something that Sinead said earlier in the meeting, which is that in terms of the housing builds that are expected over the course of, I think it's the next year or two. Obviously, there's sort of an assumed number, but I think it was said that it was anticipated that that could see additional numbers being added if there was I'm presuming if there's additional funding made available. I mean, is that working on the basis of in your funding streams being made more available to DFC? Sort of how would that work in practice?
So I was really referring to in-year additions to the programme. The programme, we have a bidding round, a housing association bidding round, which is actually just completed, where the housing associations bid on schemes that have been registered and supported, and they're added to the programme. But obviously during the year, they might have reached agreements with other landowners, developers, and come to us for support. And there's schemes that could progress within that year and they could potentially be added to the programme just based on, external factors like planning and viability and that. But obviously the budget is a huge issue as well. This year we have a target of 2,000 homes, but based on the budget that we have, we're likely to only deliver 1,150. So the budget will obviously dictate what homes are delivered and when, but it's an ongoing process, that engagement with housing associations, and where we have directed them to build based on need, they will continue to actively engage with landowners and developers in that area, and there's an ongoing conversation between us. So the programme, the draft programme is presented to the Minister at the end of the year and it's published, but there are always opportunities for that to change throughout the year.
Okay, thanks very much. Going to Councillor Brown, and then after that, Councillor Debbie Coyle. Those are the two final contributors, unless I get indications otherwise. Councillor Brown. I'll bring you on here.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so in my own DA of Enniskillen, there is a housing scheme in the programme based on the Cornergrade Road area of Enniskillen there. And a bit like the Grosvenor Barracks scheme, it has faced long delays, and I haven't heard any recent updates. So I was just wondering if you have any recent updates. Are we going to get any closer soon? Thank you.
So yes, I can confirm that programme is no longer on the that scheme is no longer on the programme. as expected, it is slipped from the programme, and we're looking at other schemes that could come on in its place. Brianna Skillen. Viability.
Okay, and you can follow up your discussion then, Dermot, on that one. Councillor Coyle?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, no, I just wanted to ask, because I forgot to ask earlier, around housing for people with disability, not necessarily people born with disabilities, but maybe, you know, become disabled as they go through life or whatever, and may need to be rehoused. I know a lot of modern housing, you know, focuses around disability. It has to be fit for anybody with a disability, but for people maybe on their own, older people that can give up, move out of maybe 3-4 bedroom houses, family houses, into safe new builds, or housing specifically for them. Is there any forward planning for that, and planning for single, you know, where there's relationship breakdowns, and you know, quite often, I know it's not always the case, but a lot of the time maybe mum and children get housed, but you know, dad doesn't, and it causes a lot of problems, or it could be vice versa, of course. Thank you. So wondering if there's any movement on that, and also just to ask around, you know, people only get 2 choices now, and I'm just wondering, because of that, are people being housed a little bit quicker because they're not getting 3 choices? I don't think it's a bad thing, really, to be honest, because all of the staff in the housing executive locally, if somebody really has been offered something that's really not suitable, Helen and team, whoever the final decision makers are very you know, compassionate to people, and they will accept that maybe something wasn't totally right for a particular person. So you know, that, you know, so they may get a 3rd option. But is that working? I wonder if that's working, because I think that's been in now a couple of years, or maybe a few years. Time goes pretty quick when you get older. But just around that housing for people with disability, and you know, Seamus was talking about the south. When I was canvassing down south, there's some fantastic like, they're like little villages, but they're housing with a community centre with it, and you know, for people that are more vulnerable, you know, whether it's because they've been born or acquired a disability, or maybe just, you know, older age, and they're able to give up their family home because the family's not there anymore, and move into more suitable housing for their needs. And I'm wondering if there's any schemes like that being looked at. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David.
Yes, there's a range of ways in which we ensure that housing is available for people with a range of disabilities. And I suppose individual landlords, ourselves, the housing executive, and housing associations, obviously management transfers are available to anybody, any tenant who is either keen to change their property, downsize, for example, and seek another type of property. So that's always available, and it's available through our own transfer process, and housing associations do the same. We also, each landlord can undertake both minor and major adaptations to properties for people with disabilities. That will be on the basis of occupational therapist reports. And it's a really, really important part of our work, and it's a very important health intervention that we undertake. And obviously it's subject to economic viability from our point of view as well. But we have, as I say, undertake really significant adaptations works, both minor and major, every year. So we're very proactive in that space. I mentioned supporting people, which is the housing support budget, which is an £80 million budget that's available across all 11 council areas to provide support to people with disabilities to remain in their homes. So there are a range of interventions. I suppose the final point I would make is the constrained, and you've heard from Sinead tonight about the budget for the new build programme, the constrained nature of that budget has meant less focus, I think, in recent years on supported housing, and that preparation that we should be making for older people. So that's certainly something I was at the Federation NEFA conference last week, the Federation of Housing Associations. I think there's a lot of consensus around the need for us to be building more supported housing and bringing that back into sharp focus now. So while I'm very pleased that we have the Supporting People programme, it doesn't exist in other jurisdictions anymore. So we are very, very pleased that we continue to have it, and it is making a huge impact. New build homes, and Sinead has said 10% of the programme is designated as for households who are wheelchair users, but that just meets one specific type of disability. So we need to be thinking and planning for the future.
Thank you. Councillor McNulty?
Thank
Colette?
you.
Let your hands up if you wish to come in at this late
Sorry,
stage.
thanks, Barry. I just wonder on that, how much influence do you have over transfers? You know, I know some people that are living in a 4-bedroomed house, single people living in a 4-bedroomed house. How much influence would you have in helping them to transfer? Or maybe if they didn't want to, how can you put it to them? You know, maybe it'd be better in a pensioner house or a 1-bedroomed house.
Hello. At this moment in time, we don't force anybody to move. So if somebody's living in a 4-bed house, a single person, an older person, their family's moved out, at this stage, we don't force them. We would sometimes try to encourage people, you know, to maybe consider an exchange. Say you have a young family living in a 1 or 2 bedroom bungalow, and we become aware, you know, that they want to go on the transfer list. We would maybe encourage them to do an exchange, but at the present time, like we don't force people to move, but we would encourage them to consider downsizing, you know, at a certain time in their life.
You wouldn't force anybody, but I just know a few. They're nobody that ever had a family. You know, there'd be single people just living in a 4-bedroomed house. You know, are you aware of them, and would you ever be able to send them a letter like offering such an option to them?
Yeah. Okay, John.
I suppose that the first point I would make is a tenancy is a legal right to the property, and we have to respect that. And unless somebody's breaking their terms and conditions, and even in regards to that, we have to go to the court. So we any action or any procedures that we take around good management of our housing stock is on a voluntary basis, and in terms of working with the individuals, and there's a number of ways of that. There's a transfer scheme where ones can request smaller type accommodation or more suitable accommodation, and certainly when it comes to allocations, we look at the transfer list, and so do housing associations in regards to that. But in terms of having any kind of coercion or in terms of enforcement, no, we wouldn't, and that's not something that we would engage with at all. But on good housing management grounds, we try and work with families and individuals.
Yeah,
Okay.
maybe it's just. Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
I suppose, Colette, that is an interesting one. You know, I've played a role, soft facilitation, you know, which came
Yeah.
to a nice conclusion, you know,
Some
where
people just aren't aware that maybe they can do that. Maybe it's people on the ground to speak to them about it.
okay.
That's okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Colette. Okay, I'll come now to Alison. Alison wants to put a point.
Thanks, Chair. It's really, I suppose it's on behalf of councils generally, and if the detail comes back on you, certainly that's fine. It's specifically regarding the responsibilities of the housing executive in emergency preparedness arrangements. I'm thinking, obviously, storms and similar are now becoming more disruptive and more frequent in nature. We did have some temporary homelessness as a result of Storm Éowyn. So in the context of the other pressures on the system, what are the legislative responsibilities for the housing executive to provide assistance in those circumstances? And how would we, I suppose, locally be proposing to meet that need? Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. So again, I can follow up in writing. It might be best to do that in relation to emergency response and preparedness. But certainly we have a role as a public body, first of all, to meet our obligations under civil contingencies and emergency planning rules. During Storm Éowyn, we led that out alongside other public bodies, such as the Department for Communities. And certainly in any storm situation, or indeed any emergency situation, we will meet need that is in front of us in relation to individuals or households who are made homeless during that, whether it's an extreme weather event and so on. And so that in a way is not any different from any other time of the year when somebody finds themselves in a situation where they need to present to us, then we will meet that need. What we don't do is provide short-term emergency housing, and that's where public bodies come together to do that. So councils being hugely important. So if somebody is in need overnight, for example, to move quickly, then we will use a range of other venues, including other public bodies, including councils. But again, I can write to you, Alison, just to set that out clearly. And it's a well-established approach that we take. We work very, very well with councils, obviously, and we work well with other public bodies in that situation.
Okay. Maybe I could just ask Helen about a biodiversity issue. How does the Housing Executive and the Council work together, on biodiversity issues? Like, for example, if the council property boundaried with Housing Executive property and there was a tree planting scheme, that type of thing, is there a particular point of contact in the Housing Executive who looks at that type of thing? Okay. Nigel Farrell would be your contact. Should have picked up something on that front. Okay, thanks very much. Okay, now, that was a very strong engagement there. I would commend councillors in the room and online, and I would also commend the Housing Executive team for the nature of this engagement tonight and annually, taking it seriously and bringing a strong team that can answer the questions. So that's very helpful. Thank you. We'll move on to item 4 on the agenda, which is correspondence. Okay, there isn't any correspondence. And then see this other one, any urgent and relevant business, you all know. If you write to me before 6 o'clock by email, you will be heard, but none of you have done that. So in the absence of that, and just before I conclude, I would say to Councillor McGrath, thanks for your strategic intervention there. Not to be outdone, Anthony has been commended for his practicality. Not to be outdone, Bernard McGrath did the same. Takes the farmers to keep us right here. Okay, so with that, I'll draw the meeting to a close. The meeting is now ended. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.